peoples of the world, welcome back to the EDH Community Theater. I'm Capital G, bringing you real decks played by real players over on Spell Table and Discord. And it was only a matter of time before someone in the community was going to give me an Atraxa deck. FrostReaper is the one to do it. So thank you for giving us this absolute liar of a deck. What do I mean by that? Well, before I tell you why I call the deck a liar, there's my socials where you can find me on Discord directly. You can find me on Tik Tok, all sorts of shenanigans there. The server of many things, the place that I primarily play on. And Board Game Arena, that's my username there in case you want to come play some modern European games with me online through a web browser. Alright, FrostReaper, thank you again. Atraxa, Praetor's voice, we all know it, we all love it. But for those that, maybe just getting to the format and haven't quite spotted her yet, it's a green, a white, a black, and a blue for this 4/4 Angel Horror. I think it's probably changed the type to Phyrexian Angel Horror, but as of the printing that I've got here, it doesn't show that. Nonetheless, all the keywords that you would ever want on a commander: flying, vigilance, death touch, and lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, proliferate. That of course means that you take a counter on any number of permanents you control and add an additional one to that permanent. So, fun ability. Here's where I call the deck a liar. So, most of the list, as you'll see, is proliferating +1/+1 counters. A common strategy with Atraxa. But the reason my pack one, pick one is Tainted Pack. Tucked into the list is a bunch of silly little 2 and 3 card combos that are back-breaking and game-ending. So, Tainted Pack, for 2 mana at instant speed, gives you access to whatever it is you need to make that to end the game on the spot. So those who haven't seen Tainted Pack, very powerful card. This is the Strixhaven reprinted version of that. Mystical Archives. For 2 mana at instant speed, exile top card of your library. You may put that card into your hand unless it has the same name as another card exiled this way. Repeat this process until you put a card into your hand or you exile 2 cards with the same name, whichever comes first. So, Commander being Commander, the only time you can exile 2 cards of the same name is if you're running, say, Shadowborn Apostles, or if you're running a ton of basic lands. So the fewer basic lands you run, the less likely it is that you're going to run into duplicate cards in a typical Commander game. So that's why it's pack one, pick one, because again, you're sitting on the table, you're thinking that you're just playing against a +1/+1 counters deck, and then all of a sudden Tainted Pack into a combo piece and the game is over. Let's dive into the main list. Of course, we're going to go through our artifacts, as we often see here, the Arcane Signet, especially in 4 colors. Basalt Monolith. Anytime you see this card in a list, you have to be suspicious because there's usually ways to go infinite with it. Bolas' Citadel, pay the life. Play spells for free. You can also play land off the top for free if you haven't made your land drop. So, stupidly powerful card. We all run into this on a pretty constant basis. Beware of it. Expedition Map, go gets a key land when we need it. The Golgari Signet. Grind Clock. Here's a weird one. This is actually the first time I'm seeing this card myself. Tap this, put a charge counter on Grind Clock. So the idea is you throw your charge counter on this, you start proliferating it, and then you can tap it and start milling people. So target play, of course, the second type ability is target play puts the top X cards of their library into their graveyard, where X is the number of charge counters on Grind Lock. Selesnya Signet, Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots. We got a couple of swords with the Sword of Hearth and Home, which lets you exile a creature you're owning, then lets you go get a basic land out of your deck, put both back onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Sword of War and Peace, protection from red and white, a very offensive piece this one. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, this deals damage equal to the number of cards in their hand, you gain a life for each card in your hand. And the Ozolith. because again, it's mostly +1/+1 counters theme, and if your creatures get removed, those counters can thus be stored onto the Ozolith and moved on to other things later. So creatures. Abzan Battle Priest. This can put a +1/+1 counter onto itself because of the Outlast ability. Outlast is pay 1. In this case, you pay the cost, which is a white, and tap the creature. You can only do this at sorcery speed. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has lifelink. That's always true. Very powerful static ability. Abzan Falconer, similar deal, except in this case it provides the flying. Baneslayer Angel. This is a bit of a meta call. Flying, first strike, lifelink, protection from demons and from dragons. Dragons especially. Protection from dragons. I run into the Dragon, Tiamat, Miram all the time. Pretty much every second game I see a dragon deck of some sort. This is an excellent meta call. Blood Artist. A little bit of aristocrat synergy here. When this or another creature dies, target player loses a life and you gain a life. Devoted Druid. Also something to be very, very suspicious of when you see it. 2 mana O2. This taps for a green, but then you can just put a -1/-1 counter on it to untap it. And in theory, you should only be able to put that -1/-1 counter on it once, because once you put the second one on there, it's supposed to die, right? Well, again, when you're running this card, chances are you have a way around that. Amara, Soul of the Accord. This may seem like a weird ad at first. It's no synergies with +1/+1 counters, but again, the deck's a liar. This is not a +1/+1 counters deck. But I digress. White and green for this 2/2 Elf Cleric, and when she becomes tapped, we create a white soldier creature token with lifelink. Maybe we have a way to tap, untap, tap, untap, tap, untap. Who knows? All I know is that we do want to draw into those cards, so Esper Sentinel will help us with that. And also, once we get some +1/+1 counters onto Esper Sentinel and make its power higher, it'll make it less and less likely as the game goes on that people can pay the cost to prevent you from drawing that card. Evolution Sage, of course, play a land, proliferate. Felisa, Fang of Silverquill. This flies, it has Mentor, she's a vampire wizard, and whenever a non-token creature you control dies, if it had counters on it, create X tapped 2/1 white and black Inkling tokens with flying. Cool, so if someone's got like 15 counters on it, it dies, we get a bunch of Inklings. I like that idea. Cool card. Forgotten Ancient, of course, when players play spells, that gets the 1/1 +1/+1 counter, and then you can just move them around at will. Grateful Apparition, whenever these deals combat damage to a player or planeswalker, proliferate. Gyre Sage. It has Evolve, which means as long as you play a creature that's got more power than this, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Actually, more power or more toughness, I should say. And then this taps for green mana for each +1/+1 counter on the Gyre Sage. Hamza, Guardian of Arashin. It says 6 mana, but it's going to cost way less because we're going to put 1/1 counters on our creatures. And then creature spells cost generic mana less to cast for each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter. Incubation Druid. This is another combo piece, be careful. 2 mana for this O2 Elf Druid. This taps for mana of any color, but if it has a +1/+1 counter on it, and it's got the adaptability, so it can put +1/+1 counters onto itself. But it doesn't matter how it gets that +1 counter. Once it's got it, this taps for 3 mana of any one color. Cannon. We saw Basalt Monolith earlier. Cannon is the other piece of that combo. Blue-green for this 2/2 Human Druid. Whenever you tap a non-land permanent for mana, add 1 mana of that type that the permanent produced. So the idea with this and Basalt Monolith is now Basalt Monolith taps for 4 mana. It still costs only 3 mana to untap it, so it's gain 4, pay 3, gain 4, pay 3. Each time accumulating a generic mana. So, fortunately, the activated ability does have a color requirement. But once we have ways of converting that mana into colored mana, well, this is infinite, and it's lights out for the game, that's for sure. Running Queen. The bunny rabbit that everybody loves. Taps. Each player may draw a card, and each player who drew a card this way gains a life. Lathiel says at the beginning of each end step, if you've gained life, distribute up to that many +1/+1 counters amongst any number of other target creatures. The next episode, we're going to see a lot more of Lathiel. Heads up on that. But for today, this is just a great little addition tucked into the 99, especially if our commander having lifelink. That means it swings out for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, however big it is, and then pumps the whole team based on that. Luminarch Aspirant says at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. Simple, effective. One of those cards that tricks you into thinking it's just a +1/+1 counters deck. The Managorger Hydra. Whenever any player casts a spell, this gets bigger. It's also got trample. It can also be proliferated. Insane. Mirren Crusader. Double strike protection from black and from green. Again, probably this one's more of a meta call. There's no special abilities it has per se, but once you start proliferating counters onto it, and remember, proliferate does not target. So yes, Atraxa can add counters to the Mirren Crusader because it doesn't target. Nils, Discipline Enforcer. So the deck doesn't actually have a lot of interaction, but it's got some stacks variance, shall we say? So let's look at Nils as the example of this. At the beginning of your end step, for each player, put a 1/1 counter on up to one target creature that player controls. Then each creature with one or more counters on it cannot attack you or planeswalkers you control unless its controller pays X. X is the number of counters on that creature. So the idea here is we want to make all of our opponent's creatures humongous so that they can attack each other with it because they won't be able to afford to attack you with it. Such as the concept. Perry the Pulverizer. Frost was describing himself as a banned player that wanted to try out some black cards. So Perry, of course, being a very, very banned card. The black cards that he's added into this particular list obviously warp the whole idea of banned to begin with. That's totally fine. Still, interesting to start off with banned and just like, oh, I'm going to add black. That was the whole idea of picking Atraxa. But another advantage to Atraxa is that this proliferates shield counters. So this will actually introduce a shield counter to the game. You put it on Perry, you put it on to Atraxa, then you can proliferate those shield counters. So if a creature would be dealt damage or destroyed, you instead remove the shield counter from it. But once it's got like 4, 5, 6, it is really, really difficult to get rid of all of those counters. Also, whenever Perry attacks, target creature you control gains trample and +X. X is the number of different kinds of counters among permanents you control. So we're primarily using +1/+1 counters. This introduces the shield counter, and there have been a couple of cards with charge counters. So chances are it's going to be +3/+3 in trample, but when you give that to Atraxa, when you give trample to Atraxa, oh, she's got Death Touch already. That means if our opponents even have any blockers, Atraxa would only have to assign 1 damage to that blocker, and then everything else tramples through. So excellent synergy here. Rayhan. For 3 mana, it's a 0/0, but it says that it enters the battlefield with 3 +1/+1 counters on it, so super easy to proliferate this. And whenever a creature you control dies or is put into the command zone, if it had +1/+1 counters on it, you may put that many +1/+1 counters on target creature. Fantastic way to move your counters around if your commander or any other creature is targeted by removal. Roalesk Apex Hybrid. This has flying and trample. What comes down, it distributes 2 +1/+1 counters on another creature. And then when this dies, proliferate, then proliferate again. So if this dies, proliferate twice. Insane stuff there. Scavenging Ooze. This just helps control our opponent's graveyards. And it can put +1/+1 counters onto itself too, so it synergizes actually very nicely. Soul's Attendant. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you may gain a life. Why not? I told you this deck was a liar. There's a Thassa's Oracle in here. And this deck can in fact win with Thassa's Oracle. Especially if you already have the Oracle in hand, you cast your Tainted Pack and churn through your deck. Thrumming Bird. Whenever this deals combat damage to a player, only a player, proliferate. Victory's Envoy. Says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a 1/1 counter on each other creature you control. Viscera Seer. Sack a creature, scry 1. Vizier of Remedies. 2 mana for this 2/1. It says if one or more -1/-1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many -1/-1 counters -1 are put on it instead. Hey, do you remember a certain elf creature that untaps when you put a -1/-1 counter on it? Well, with the Vizier, it doesn't get that counter. At least that's the theory behind it. I'll double check and make sure the rules interaction works the way I think it does. Please confirm in the comments if this does in fact do the thing I think it does. That makes basically untapping our Devoted Druid free, absolutely free. Of course, we need a place to dump all that mana, so Walking Ballista is perfect. Once we get to our infinite mana, we cast this for double X. Put all the +1/+1 counters we need on this thing, and then shoot our opponents down 1 counter at a time. Over to a few enchantments. Beastmaster Ascension. Again, playing into the +1/+1 counter side of things, but this also lets us, just win through combat. This deck is definitely capable of winning through combat if it gets out of control. Green and 2, whenever a creature you control attacks, this gets a quest counter. Once this has 7 or more quest counters, creatures you control get +5/+5. Branching Evolution. If one or more 1/1 counters we put on a creature you control, twice that many counters are put onto that creature instead. This is sort of the budget doubling season. Although in here, since we're primarily caring about +1/+1 counters, this is better than doubling season, especially with that lower mana value. Remember Emiria? It says whenever she becomes tapped, we get to create a lifelinking token. Well, once you get a way to generate a bunch of blue mana freed from the reel. You pay blue mana to tap her, play blue mana to untap her, pay blue mana to tap her, play blue mana to untap her. It can get there. This deck can definitely do that. This can also, go on to... let's go back to some of our creatures. We were talking about... not so much Devoted Druid, but Gyre Sage, for example. Pay the blue mana to untap that, or Incubation Druid especially is where we want to enchant this. Because then this can tap for 3 blue mana and untap itself. Tap for 3 blue mana, untap itself. So Freed from the Reel is here for the infinite combo with Incubation Druid. Primarily, but again, it could also go into Emiria and generate us a bunch of lifelinking tokens. Moving on through the enchantments, we've got Frozen Aether. Just a way to trip up our opponents a little bit. Artifacts, creatures, and lands our opponents control come into play tapped. Journey to Eternity. So if we have a creature we want to protect, we throw this on there. When the creature dies, the creature will actually return to the battlefield under our control. Then this will actually flip into a land, the Adsal Cave of Eternity, which not only taps our mana of any color, fantastic for a 4-color deck. But if we need to bring a creature card back from our graveyard to the battlefield, we have that ability on a land that we can use as many times as we like. Mana Bloom. This is a fantastic interaction because we've seen ways of generating infinite colorless mana very, very easily with, say, Kinnan and the Basalt Monolith, for example. As long as we have an extra green mana floating around, we can dump all that mana into X on Mana Bloom. This will come into play with that many charge counters on it, but then we remove all those charge counters, making sure that we keep some green and just keep generating more and more mana that way. So this helps convert all of our colorless mana, or if you were to generate infinite mana with the Gyre Sage, for example, it would just convert all that mana into whatever colors we need. So absolutely fantastic to see this here. Phyresis. The only infect card in the deck, actually. But you can definitely see why it's here. You throw this onto Atraxa, smack someone, and then their doom becomes inevitable. Sagara Summons. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have base power and toughness 4/4, flying, and are angels in addition to their other types. Again, this just plays more into the +1/+1 counters disguise that this deck has. I say it's a disguise, but by the same token, if someone recognizes and stops your combos, but you still have a half dozen creatures, that are getting bigger and bigger and bigger every turn. Then you drop this, and they all become bigger and bigger and bigger, and flying. Still a valid way to win the game. Utopia Vow. Throw this onto a creature, it cannot attack or block. Enchanted creature has tap to add 1 mana of any color. So, two ways you can use this card. One is that you can essentially use it as a pacifism on one of your opponent's creatures. Alternatively, you can throw it onto one of your own creatures and use it as mana ramp. So Utopia Vow, very flexible in that regard. Interesting pick. Zendikar Resurgent is our last enchantment. It says that our lands tap for additional mana. And whenever we cast a creature spell, draw a card. Over to instants. We've got some old-fashioned, just solid, reliable counter spells such as Cancel. Confound, this is a fun pick. Someone points some targeted spells at one of your creatures. You can counter it with Confound. It's a blue and 1, so easy to cast. And it draws you the card back. So, interesting pick. I do like this. Despark exiles a permanent with mana value 4 or greater for a black and a white. Instant speed. Noxious Revival. You're never going to pay the green mana. You're going to pay the 2 life. Put target card from a graveyard on top of its owner's library. You can get something back from your graveyard. You can mess up somebody else's plans. A couple of ways you can use this. Pretty cool. Silence. When you're ready to go off on your upkeep, you pay the 1 white mana, cast this, and make sure your opponents cannot interfere with your plans. And Sinister Sabotage, another 3 mana counter spell, but it also adds the nice benefit of Surveil. Sorceries, just 2. We've got Tezzard's Gambit, which you pay the 2 life and 3 generic mana, draw 2 cards, then proliferate. You could pay the blue mana if you really can't afford to lose the 2 life, but chances are you can. And 3 visits lets you go get a forest card. It doesn't have to be a basic forest. It could be any land with a forest type. Puts it onto the battlefield, then you shuffle. Pretty sweet stuff. Again, not a lot of interaction, and notice no other tutors. That is one thing I definitely respect with the deck, is that in spite of all the little combinations that they have in the deck, there are no tutors. Other than, say, 3 visits to go get a land. So, interesting approach to the deck. I definitely respect it. Planeswalkers. What's an Atraxa deck without Planeswalkers? But we just got 3 of them. And again, they play more into the +1/+1 counter side of things. We've got Ajani Steadfast, which it's a card that I run in my Atraxa deck, actually. +1 to grant the buff and a keyword. Well, a bunch of keywords, actually. -2 to put my +1/+1 counters on the whole team. This could get to the -7 if it ever does. If a source would deal damage to you or a planeswalker you control, prevent all but 1 of that damage. So if you're only ever taking 1 damage from your opponents, like, at all, well, you're not. I mean, the game's a lock because your opponents will not be able to take you down. Another Ajani, in this case, Adversary of Tyrants. From M19, 4 mana for this 4 loyalty Ajani. Again, the +1 puts a 1/1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. The -2, this is actually pretty valuable. Return a creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. We do have a lot of very powerful 2-drops in the deck, as we've already seen. And the -7 says you get an Emblem Whip at the beginning of your end step. Create 3 white cat creature tokens with lifelink. This -7 we're not really in a rush for. This is definitely here more for the -2 and occasionally the +1. Our last Planeswalker, Basri Ket. I wonder if he'll end up replacing Ajani in the story as the primary white Planeswalker going forward. We will see what happens in the over the course of the next few sets. +1 says put a 1/1 counter up to 1 target creature and it gains indestructible, making it easy for you to swing and try to get some damage through. -2 says whenever 1 or more non-token creatures attack this turn, create that many soldier creature tokens that are tapped and attacking. And then -6 says you get an emblem with at the beginning of combat on your turn. Create a white soldier creature token to put a 1/1 counter on each creature you control. So just a slowly generating army. Again, not a powerful ultimate. The +1 is what it's here for. Maybe the -2, but primarily the +1, I would think. But yeah, that's the core of the deck. Lands, only 33 of them. That's a little few for my taste, especially for a 4-color deck, but let's see what we got going. We've got the Canopy Vista, Command Tower, we got Evolving Wilds, Exotic Orchard, Fabled Passage, 5 Forests, a Fortified Village, Gravity Township, a Glacial Fortress, 4 Islands, 3 Plains, a Fiend's Tower, a Reliquary Tower, assuming that we get to draw and keep a bunch of cards in our hand, Selesnya Sanctuary, Spara's Headquarters, 5 Swamps, Temple of the False God, Terramorphic Expanse, Yavimaya, and Zagoth Triome. Mana base is pretty solid. Nothing that really stands out with the mana base itself, but it is again the +1/+1 counters deck with all these hidden and disguised combos. I love it. So Mr. FrostReaper, thank you again for dropping this one. Cards that I would consider. I always like to throw in a few of these at the end. Well, again, with our pick one card being Tainted Pact, I think I'd like to reduce the chances of running into duplicate card names personally. So I feel like half the basics in the deck should be snow covered. And if I'm gonna run Tainted Pact in a 4-color deck like Atraxa, I think I only want 4 regular basics and 4 snow covered basics total. Especially since the deck itself doesn't run a lot of land tutors. Most of the land tutors it runs are lands themselves, in fact. So, there you go. Other little synergies. I know that some people think that the Vivid lands are a little slow. Maybe not run all 4 if you think that's the case, but definitely run 1 or 2. Because basically, once Atraxa is out, this will always tap for whatever color mana you need. Very solid, very reliable. Slightly faster is the Gemstone Mine if you can scoop up a copy of this one. I mean, yes, you have to sacrifice it if it ever runs out of counters, but the idea is we're proliferating enough that that should not be an issue. I've never had to sacrifice my Gemstone Mine because I ran out of counters, that's for sure. I find it weird that we're running 3 visits but not Farseek and Nature's Lore. Because these can really go get our... Not necessarily not our basic lands, but our non-basic lands with the appropriate types. But again, we're not running a lot of tutors in here. But this is kind of where I would go. A good ramp piece, because we're already running Freed from the Real. So tuck your Ricksmithies into the deck. Yes, it's 4 mana. Yes, this comes into play tapped. Once it untaps, it's tapping for 2 mana. It won't take long to remove those slumber counters. You can remove them at your pace, so you don't have to take that 5th one off until you're ready. But once you are, you've got a 12/12 sitting in your back pocket. And on top of that, you're running Freed from the Real in the deck already. Toss it on there, infinite green mana. Just another sneaky little combo. And, of course, because we like playing with the +1/+1 counters, a few enchantments. A couple of backgrounds, actually, starting with the Master Chef. If you curve this, like, this comes down on 3, Atraxa on 4. Atraxa will come in with a +1/+1 counter already if you curve out that way. And then every other creature behind that is going to come out with +1/+1 counters on them already. Noble Heritage, even better. Commander creatures you own have when this enters the battlefield and at the beginning of your upkeep. Each player may put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature they control, and for each opponent who does, you gain protection from that player. So you cannot be targeted, dealt damage, or enchanted by anything controlled by that player. So if someone wants to swing at you, but they've accepted the Noble Heritage counters, well, they can't deal damage to you. And if they don't accept the counters, then you know who to attack. So I think this is actually a great card for Atraxa. I'm gonna try this one in mine. I haven't updated my Atraxa deck in a hot minute. I do have a copy of Noble Heritage. I should give that a shot. But one thing my Atraxa deck does have, because it's got the +1/+1 counter theme also, is the Simic Ascendancy. This says that we win the game if we just have enough growth counters on the Simic Ascendancy. And how does this get growth counters? By creatures gaining +1/+1 counters. It only takes a turn or two to get to that magic number of 20. It happens so fast. So, again, those are the Gary ideas for this concept of the deck. But again, not my deck. It's Frost. He's spent quite a bit of time honing this in, and I would be outright frightened to play against this thing. That's for sure. Frost, thank you again, and thank you all for watching this video. Got a few more of these coming next week. Going on a little family vacation, so it'll be a bit before you hear from me again. But be sure to check out the channel and see all the older content. We've got a couple of older videos here as well. Be sure to check those out. Come see us on Discord. Come join me on Board Game Arena. And we'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.